Hey, I'm Louise, and I wanted to tell you how I was stuck on a roller coaster for 3 days. And that was just the beginning of my problems. It all started when a birthday surprise went really wrong. It was the day of my birthday, and I thought my friends Becky and Dan knew me well enough to know what I'm into: shopping, spas, and selfies. They told me that we were going on a day out as a surprise, and I was so excited. Until we got there. They had taken me to a lousy theme park. I was so annoyed. Did they think I was a kid? We lined up for over an hour to be among the first people to ride their new roller coaster. It was supposed to be one of the scariest roller coasters in the world, but I hate them. I think they're really scary and they really mess up my hair, but I didn't want to tell them that. I was really nervous, and then it got worse. We were allocated the front seats. My friends were so excited as they are the best ones, but that just made me even more scared. I felt sick as the ride started. It went so fast and there were so many loops. Then, as we went upside down on the biggest loop yet, the ride suddenly stopped. It happened so quickly that the ride jolted and it really hurt my head and neck. We were left hanging upside down. This wasn't part of the ride, surely? I realized quickly that it wasn't. Soon, everyone was screaming. It was like a nightmare. Why wasn't the ride starting again? I began to panic. Never in my life had I screamed so loud. I was so terrified. On my left, my friend Becky was uncontrollably crying. On my right, I saw Dan unconscious, and he had blood coming from his nose. I shouted at him until he opened his eyes. Everyone behind me was crying, screaming, begging for help. I realized there must be about 50 people on this ride, and they were all stuck like us. The sounds were terrifying. I got out my phone and tried to call for help, but I had no signal. I must have passed out for a while, as when we woke up, I realized that I had dropped my phone and it was smashed on the ground below. I was so annoyed, especially as I never bother with insurance. Then I saw something that made me even more frightened. There was smoke coming off the train we were on. It looked like it was going to catch on fire. I looked around. I couldn't even see a fire engine. Then I heard shouting. I thought it was a rescue party, but it wasn't. It was the press. There were reporters and film crews everywhere below filming us and taking photos. I tried to shout at them to help us, but they couldn't hear me. I don't know how long we were upside down, but it felt like hours. Then, suddenly, the train moved. It went forward until we were the right way up, at the top of a loop looking downwards. But then the ride stopped again. I couldn't believe it! Now I was upright. I felt my blood rushing out of my head and back through my body. Becky had stopped crying, and I was so angry at her. I started shouting at her, telling her how I hadn't even wanted to go on this roller coaster in the first place, as I was worried something was going to go wrong. And I was right! Then she got angry at me and told me that she thought it was my idea to go to the theme park. I couldn't believe it. Becky was such a liar. Like I would have wanted to come to this stupid theme park. Then Dan woke up. He looked really rough and his voice croaked. He admitted that it was his idea to go to the theme park. He knew that neither of us wanted to go. He even knew I had a fear of heights. So he told Becky that it was my idea and told me it was Becky's. Unbelievable! And it didn't stop there. I got so mad that I confessed to Dan that I was the one who spread rumors that he still pees his bed, which is, by the way, true. Becky then told me she kissed my BF in 3rd grade and our fight kept going. I didn't want to talk to either of them ever again. After 10 hours had passed, I heard a really loud noise like a helicopter above my head. I looked up and saw it wasn't a helicopter. It was a drone. It was carrying 3 boxes. It lowered down until it was close to us, and I took the boxes. I handed one to Dan and one to Becky without speaking to them. I opened mine up. Inside of it was a cheeseburger and fries. I heard Becky sounding really excited and starting to eat. Dan had passed out again and dropped his on the floor, but I was not impressed. I was on a cleanse and I didn't want to eat anything this unhealthy. They could have asked me what I wanted. I was about to throw my box onto the ground when I realized there was something else in the box. I heard a ringing sound. It was a mobile phone. I answered it. It was someone from the theme park. They told me that we were going to be rescued, but it might take a while. The ride designer was on a Caribbean cruise and he wasn't answering his phone. They didn't know how to fix the problem without speaking to him. It was starting to get dark now. I told the man on the phone that he had better get me down soon. If not, I was going to sue. I demanded that he get me some healthy food and a blanket. I was starting to get cold. I must have fallen asleep, as when I woke up, the sun was starting to rise. I was cold and tired and weak. I looked at Dan. He wasn't moving. He looked dead. I couldn't believe that the last time I'd spoke to him was to get angry at him. It wasn't his fault the ride went wrong. Then I thought of something terrible. Suddenly, I projectile vomited everywhere. The crowd of camera crew who had been there for 2 days were getting covered in my sick. They ran for cover. As scared as I was also pleased that it hit them. Then I realized I was covered in sick too. It was so gross, and as the sun got higher in the sky, it started to dry and really smell. I had no choice, but I had to take my top off. It took me loads of struggling, but I eventually got it off. I dropped it to the ground below. It was just in my jeans and bra, but you know what? I didn't care. It's not like I had boobs anyway. I was as flat-chested as a boy. At least I couldn't smell the sick anymore. That night, I had a terrible night's sleep, and I was so cold. Then I heard the sound of a phone ringing. I was confused for a minute. My phone was gone, so where was it coming from? Then I realized it was the phone that had been in the box. I answered it. It was a journalist who wanted to interview me about the accident. They wanted to know if I would talk to them. I told them they could speak to me, but only if they would pay me what I wanted, and I asked for a lot of money. He said he would see what he could do. I stayed up all night waiting for him to call me back, but he never did. If that wasn't bad enough, that stupid drone couldn't bring us any more food. It was apparently too windy for it to fly. The next morning, when I woke up, I heard something loud. It was the sound of the roller coaster going back on. I had never been so pleased. The train started moving again. It went really fast as it finished its course. Finally, it took us to the exit and came to a stop. As soon as the restraint lifted, I got up. I was really wobbly. A paramedic came running over to me and wrapped a blanket around me. But I was okay. I didn't have a chance to get upset though, as by then my parents had come running over to me. They were so happy to see me, and for once I was happy to see them. They gave me a drink and some food. Then I remembered something. I felt in my jean pockets. It wasn't there. I had taken a roll of banknotes with me to the theme park. I hadn't known that the theme park was my birthday surprise. I was hoping for a day out shopping, so I had come prepared with all of my savings. Now, they were gone. Then I remembered. They were in the pocket of the top that I had taken off when it got covered in sick. Even though I was really weak, I knew I needed to look for that money. I ran outside and looked around for my top on the floor, but of course, it was gone. I was so upset about the money, but no one seemed to care. I was taken to the hospital to recover, but luckily I was okay. I was put on a drip to help pick up my energy, but I didn't mind. Becky was in the next bed. She wasn't so lucky. She needed lots of injections and tablets to get her better, but she was always the dramatic one. Once my parents had bought me a new phone, I saw that the accident was on the news. Not just in this country, but all around the world. Then I couldn't believe what I saw. There were pictures of me all over the news, and they were terrible. There was even a film of me being sick into the crowd below, and I was just wearing my jeans and bra. When I got out of the hospital, all of my friends thought it was some big joke. They didn't think about how scary it was to have gone through all this. They even started calling me horrible names. Spewy Louie and Flatty for being flat-chested. They thought they were being so funny. My mom and dad were so angry about what happened at the theme park that they decided to sue. I had to stand up in court and talk about what happened. Our lawyer encouraged me to talk about how scared I was and how awful it must have been to see my friend die. But I wanted to talk about the things that really affected me. I told them that the food I was bought was horrible and that I wasn't happy that such bad pictures of me was used in the press. Later on, the lawyer told me that my answers weren't that good. But it didn't matter. We won a lot of money anyway. $1 million. I knew what I wanted to do with the money. I wanted to make sure that people knew who I really was. I didn't want to be known for the viral girl pukes on roller coaster in a crowd video, so I spent the money on myself. I had my teeth whitened and I had a boob job and butt lift, and I paid for a couple of photo shoots with top photographers. Now I'm a well-known influencer, and my friends don't call me Spewy Louie anymore.
Hi, my name is Gloria, and recently I went through something pretty traumatic. Unlike most of you, I never found a place that I can call home. You see, I'm originally from Mexico, but last year I immigrated to the USA. Throughout my childhood, everyone always talked about the American dream. So when my dad told us we'd be moving there, I wasn't surprised. But what happened next turned my family's life upside down. I still get shivers thinking about it today, and I need to be honest with you guys. I wish we'd never moved. Truly, it was the biggest mistake of our life. Part of me was a tiny bit curious about moving to the USA, but I didn't want to leave Mexico. Our life was simple and I liked it that way. My dad, however, always talked about the lack of opportunities for us in Mexico and how we could have a much better life if we immigrated. His best friend Juan moved a few years ago, and he made out as if living in the USA was the best thing ever. For Juan and his family, it had been such a smooth process. They had obtained their visas easily, found a nice enough apartment, and landed good jobs and places in a great school. It seems so simple, right? And he promised my dad it'd be the same for us. That once we got there, we'd live happily ever after like them. Well, if only. Dad decided he would go first and stay with Juan until he sorted things out for us. His visa was surprisingly quick to come through, and before we knew it, he was on his way. We dropped him off at the border with only a suitcase of clothes and said we'd see him soon. Mom was pretty emotional as this would be the first time they'd been separated since they'd met. There were a lot of tears, and I remember thinking, chill out, Mom. I mean, we'd be there in like a month. Why all the tears? It's almost like she had a premonition of what was going to happen. Later that day, we got a call from Dad, and everything had gone well. He was at Juan's place, and he said he'd start looking for a job immediately, and that we should begin the visa process. He urged us to use the agency he'd used, as they had a few guys on the inside that could hustle the visas along. So, that's what we did. We used an agency, and they promised us the visas would be ready within a month. After a month passed, we still didn't have our visas. We were worried something had gone wrong. I felt this deep sense of dread, but also a kind of peace. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. During our month of waiting, Dad landed 2 jobs. One was stacking shelves with Juan in a supermarket, and the other was as a taxi driver. So he was pretty much working 24/7. I mean, would we even see him? We eventually got our visas. Turns out they'd messed up our names and had to redo them all. We headed towards the border, and it was like deja vu, except this time, we were the ones crossing. I crossed first and had no problems. They asked me a few questions like where would I be living, what school would I be going to, etc. But otherwise, it was super chilled and I felt so relieved. I mean, you always hear these horror stories of immigration officials interrogating people. Pedro was up next, and it was smooth sailing for him too. They didn't ask him any questions because his English is pretty much non-existent. He was only 7 years old then, so you can't blame him. Then it was Mom's turn. It looked like everything was going well. It almost looked like the immigration official was flirting with Mom. I saw her laughing, but then something else happened. Suddenly, she wasn't laughing. She wasn't even smiling. 2 security guards came over and one was on the phone. The next moment was a complete blur as I saw Mom break down into tears and get escorted away. I started screaming for her. She tried to turn around, but the guards were marching her towards the interrogation room. I could hear her wailing, and I honestly had no idea what to do. I tried to get back through immigration to the Mexican side, but we were stuck in no man's land. They wouldn't let us through. I was shouting my mom's name until I almost lost my voice. An hour passed, and Pedro and I were inconsolable. We knew our dad was waiting just on the other side, and he'd be worried about us. Eventually, a female immigration officer came over to us and told us something that was about to change our lives forever. Sorry, kids, but your mom won't be getting into the USA anytime soon, I'm afraid. She committed a bad crime a few years back, and so whoever issued her visa did it illegally. There's a huge black mark on her name. Sorry to break the news to you like this, but let's get you onto the other side, shall we? I hear your dad is waiting for you. As she said all of this, tears started streaming down my face. I thought I would throw up. How could my mom be a criminal? Surely it was some kind of mistake. My mom is a nurse. She wouldn't hurt a fly. I told the woman we weren't going anywhere, but she looked me directly in the eyes and told me we didn't have a choice. and then she said something that made me want to hurt her. I advise you to cooperate here, girl. You don't want to turn out like your mom, do you? Anger was pulsing through me, and suddenly all I wanted was to see my dad. Did he know about what Mom had done? What had she done? We made it through to the American side, and if I never had to see those immigration officials again in my life, I'd be forever grateful. Both Pedro and I ran into Dad's arms, and he could instantly tell something had happened. "Where's your mom?" he said. I couldn't even speak, and he knew. His face crumbled. I'd never seen him look so broken as he did at that moment. The taxi ride back to our new life was miserable. None of us spoke. You could have pierced the silence with a needle. It was honestly horrible. Our life as we'd known it was over. That first day, I didn't even notice how run down our neighborhood was, or the fact that all we had was one mattress on the floor to sleep on. It's not like we could sleep anyway. Juan and his wife rushed over and tried to put us in touch with some lawyers, but it seemed hopeless. It all felt too raw for me to even ask Dad what Mom had done. But in bed that night, he finally told me. Before we were born, Mom had been involved in a hit-and-run accident. She had been working a night shift at the hospital and had hit a young guy who was walking in the road. She hadn't noticed and had continued on home. But then she noticed a bit of blood on her car and suddenly realized what had happened. They'd thought this was all in the past and that it would have been wiped off her record by now because the young guy had survived and had eventually dropped the charges. But clearly, this was still haunting them. At first, I felt angry. Why hadn't my mom stopped to help? That seemed so unlike her. But then things started to make sense, like why she was so jittery and nervous when we were driving on certain roads. I felt so bad for her. An accident that was actually a crime was now creeping back up and destroying her life, and our lives too? Life just felt so unfair. What would we do? Dad said she'd never get through the border now. There was no way. That night, we all cried ourselves to sleep and hoped the morning would bring some good news. But it didn't. Things just got worse. In the daylight, I noticed how dirty our new place was, and how noisy. I told Dad we should just go home and be with Mom. She needed us. But he refused. He said we'd find a way to get her here, and in the meantime, we had to start school and make a new life for ourselves. Easier said than done, though. I'm not lying when I say the next year flew by. It flew by in a blur of lawyer appointments, homework, and slowly trying to rebuild our life without Mom. Mom, of course, was back in the village with all our family and back in her old job, but she was heartbroken. We all were. I barely made any friends that first year. I just focused on getting good grades so that this whole immigration move wouldn't have been for nothing. Pedro adapted pretty quickly, and soon his English was almost as good as mine. Dad worked really hard all year so that he could rent us a nicer house to live in, something with a small garden. And when we eventually did move into that house, things did get better. I think I grew used to being the motherly figure in the house, and we were still so determined to get Mom into the USA. Dad was working tirelessly with a lawyer, but so far they hadn't been successful. Honestly, some days I wanted to just give up and go back home where we belonged. One day we got a call from the lawyer. He'd found a potential loophole that might work. Dad rushed home from his supermarket shift and we decided to have celebratory dinner. I cooked for us all, and for the first time in a year, it felt like we were finally happy. I went to wash up, and that's when I heard a crashing sound. It sounded like glass smashing. I ran through to the lounge and found Dad with his head in his hands. I didn't understand what had happened, but then I looked through the window just in time to see a gang of boys driving off with this taxi. They'd robbed us. We called the police, but there was nothing they could do. It felt like for every one step forward, we took two backward. Dad was devastated. At that moment, I realized this wasn't working. We were just living in this huge bubble of uncertainty and pretending that everything was okay. All we wanted more than anything was to be reunited with Mom, and the only way to make this happen was to move home. After everything my dad had done to make this work, we realized it was hopeless. And now that he'd just had his taxi stolen, we took this as a sign that it was time to go home. And you know what? I don't regret it for a second. I mean, we tried, we really did, but living without mom just isn't a life we want to live. Now we're back in Mexico, and our American dream seems like a distant nightmare. What do you think of my story? Please leave your comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel.